I'm sorry. Who even are you again? Bryce's voice cut through the conference room like a cheap cologne, loud, cloying, impossible to ignore. That was the first time he said it, not the last. I'd been sitting at the end of the long mahogany table, marking up a printout of our investor compliance checklist in red pen like I always did. Final week of prep. I'd barely slept, living off instant oatmeal, coffee, and spite. My badge still said Systems Strategist, but apparently that now meant human filing cabinet to Mr. FinTech frat boy strutting around with a startup swagger and a job title he clearly didn't understand. Bryce smacked his palm down on the table as he stood at the front. We're gonna do this right, people. No more PowerPoint graveyards, no more dead weight. This is our moment to shine for the buyers. Think Tesla, not Radio Shack. I looked up just in time to catch him glancing toward me. The smirk said it all. I was the Radio Shack in that sentence. Before we go any further, if you're enjoying this kind of quiet burn revenge story, do us a solid. About 97% of people listen without subscribing. A quick like or follow tells the team you want more stories like this. All right, back to the wreckage. I'd seen his type before, rushed in by the CEO to modernize the roadmap, throw around buzzwords like they're seasoning. Bryce probably majored in Venn diagrams, the kind of guy who thinks systems architecture is something you sketch on a napkin at a wine bar. Every time he talked, I swear I could hear a podcast forming. He'd been here less than 3 weeks and already had his own Slack emoji. Meanwhile, I'd spent 12 years building the very infrastructure this acquisition depended on. The integration layer? Mine. The metadata scaffolding Bryce barely understood but was happy to call bloated? Also mine. But titles don't protect you when the person above you is louder, younger, and drinks tequila with the CEO on Fridays. It got worse fast. In Tuesday's sync, I noticed my name missing from the M&A prep agenda. I wasn't listed as a presenter, not even a contributor, just observer, a fly on the wall in a room I helped build. I asked quietly in the hallway, and the intern, an actual intern, shrugged. Sorry, Melissa. Bryce said he wanted to bring fresh energy to the table. Right. Because nothing says fresh energy like gutting compliance narratives and photoshopping your face onto last year's roadmap. On Thursday, I caught Bryce tossing folders into the trash bin near the coffee machine, legacy documentation, onboarding protocols, archived integration diagrams. Digital's cleaner, he chirped when I raised an eyebrow. Nobody reads this crap anymore. That crap included a side letter signed by the original CTO outlining the IP chain of custody, a document that would matter a lot to any buyer doing diligence. But Bryce didn't ask. He just deleted, tossed, and rebranded like he was renovating a kitchen on HGTV. I said nothing. I picked the folders out of the trash after he left. By Friday, I was staying later than anyone, pretending I had new onboarding to finish. What I was really doing was making a copy of the original IP timeline and revalidating who still held co-authorship. I used a red Sharpie to circle my name next to Foundational Stack Contributor. Then I folded it, slipped it into my notebook, and stared at it like it was a birth certificate. I didn't need to wave it around. Not yet. Bryce was too busy prepping for his big show anyway. He started practicing lines in the glass conference room at night. Mirror pep talks about synergy, product market fit, scalable architecture. I watched from my cube once. He actually air guitared mid-pitch. By then, even the junior analysts were buzzing. He's really gonna impress the buyers, one whispered in the break room. It's like Shark Tank in a suit. I smiled, said nothing. Just walked past them and slid a printed architecture license into the outgoing mail slot. Overnight delivery, legal team's address. Attention line, director of diligence, confidential. Let him have his show. I wasn't here for the applause. I was here for the paper trail. Bryce made the announcement like he was accepting a Grammy. Standing in front of the wall monitor, arms wide, that cocky grin spreading like butter on cheap toast. So I'll be leading the final presentation next Thursday, he said, tossing a wink toward the CEO, who gave him that goddamn nod, like he'd just handed him the keys to the kingdom. We want to keep things exciting, fresh, forward-facing, not dusty. There was no follow-up. No one asked why I wasn't listed. No one noticed that my section, titled Foundational Dependencies and Integration Risks, had been deleted from the deck. Just gone. like I'd been a placeholder for 12 years, instead of the only reason our internal systems didn't fold in on themselves like a dying star. I kept flipping through the agenda packet like maybe my name was hiding behind a post-it. It wasn't. That afternoon, while I was restocking toner because our office manager had been furloughed, one of the junior analysts caught me in the print room. She looked like she'd just come back from a funeral, eyes wide, hands fidgeting with the sleeves of her blazer. Hey, just a heads up, she muttered, her voice low, like we were passing secrets in a prison yard. I saw the new speaker lineup. I nodded. Figured as much. She hesitated. He said it's time to show energy, not, PowerPoints from the past. Of course, I said. She looked like she wanted to say more, like she was choking on her own conscience. I saved her the pain. I offered a tight smile, patted the toner box, and went back to loading the machine. What I didn't tell her was that those PowerPoints from the past had formed the digital backbone of every module in our core product. What Bryce called legacy bloat was actually layered failsafes I'd built to pass federal compliance. But hey, what did I know? I only spent a decade inside the system while he spent 6 months posting gym selfies with captions like, "Disruption starts with discipline." When I got back to my desk, I opened my drawer and pulled out the thin laminated card tucked in the fold of my old ID badge. No one ever noticed it. It wasn't flashy. Just a simple stamp from the buyer's internal tech audit advisory board. I'd been serving as a silent board advisor for 4 years. They asked for practical insight on scalable infrastructure. I gave them context. Clean, thorough, agnostic. I'd never once tied it back to my day job. I held the badge between my fingers and stared at it for a second. Then I slipped it beneath my blouse cuff and rolled my sleeve down. Let him have the lights. I'd keep the levers. The next day, Bryce held an innovation breakfast at 8:30 sharp. He brought in protein muffins and a Keurig pod labeled Founder's Roast. He made a show of handing out new onboarding playbooks, printed in full color with his name in the footer. He called it Version 2.0. I skimmed it over a lukewarm cup of coffee and found 5 inaccuracies in the first 10 pages. My name was nowhere. By 10:15, he was leading a mock presentation in the main conference room while the CEO watched, nodding like he was watching a golden retriever do backflips. "Legacy is dead," Bryce declared. "What we're selling is velocity." Melissa, meanwhile, was handed a clipboard and told to just make sure the investor packets are in order. I've been insulted before. Hell, I've been erased before. But there was something about the casualness of it all, the way they didn't even bother pretending I mattered, that burned the slowest. It was like being ghosted by your own resume. So I did what any woman who's been pushed to the edge without being pushed over does. I sharpened my silence into something sharp enough to cut through marble. I walked back to my desk, adjusted my sleeve again, pulled open a fresh doc titled Appendix E Authorship Verification Chain, and I began typing. They thought I was out of the game. They had no idea I built the board. Bryce strutted into Tuesday's prep meeting like he was about to pitch to Mark Cuban himself. He wore that god-awful navy vest again, the kind only overconfident venture bros and Silicon Valley groomsmen think screams leadership. He launched into the buyer deck with theatrical bravado, slapping his palm against the slides like they were gospel. "This," he barked, jabbing a pie chart, "is how it's done in real startups. Disruption, speed, no filler." Every other slide had a gradient background. Every fourth word was velocity. He'd replaced our product roadmap with something that looked suspiciously like a recycled SAS diagram from a product he'd probably never built. The CEO nodded enthusiastically, as if Bryce had just solved climate change with a Canva template. I sat in the corner, where my new observer role had effectively exiled me, watching him misrepresent the very thing he stood on. I knew the names on that slide. I'd helped write the damn framework they were pitching. And yet, somehow, in the company evolution timeline Bryce so proudly presented, my name and 3 other key architects had vanished. We'd been edited out like embarrassing high school yearbook photos. The buyer wouldn't catch it immediately, but I did. Later that day, I went to the data room to do what Bryce never bothered to: verify. I pulled up the original architecture stack documentation, took my time cross-referencing authorship metadata, tracked edits, timestamps, notarizations. They were all there. My initials were everywhere, in footers, commit logs, and version histories buried so deep only someone who built the bones would know where to look. Then I found it. Appendix 9C, Foundational Systems Patent Application. Original co-authors, Melissa D. Hannigan and Edward Park. Signed and time-stamped, August 17, 2012. I stared at that signature for a long time. Back then, it felt like a formality, something legal asked us to do before they filed the provisional patent. But now? Now it was a knife that still fit perfectly in my hand. I printed a fresh copy of that patent page, ran my thumb across the bottom, grabbed a pen. Then, slow and steady, I re-signed it in black ink. The same signature I'd used back when the only coffee we had came from a vending machine that spat out sludge. I folded the page and slipped it into my notebook. No drama, no fireworks, just a piece of paper with a quiet kind of weight. Meanwhile, Bryce was upstairs teaching the executive assistants how to brand their energy on Slack. I know this because someone forwarded me the Zoom recording and I watched him say the phrase, "Optics create outcomes 3 times in 7 minutes." A real philosopher, that one. By Thursday, he'd staged a full mock presentation with 2 junior staffers playing buyer roles, complete with name badges. Bryce paused after every third slide to explain how Melissa's old stack had been streamlined by modern methods. That was how he referred to my work. Melissa's old stack. I kept my face neutral. I even nodded once when someone looked my way, like I was learning something instead of dying slowly inside. But I wasn't angry anymore. Anger implies reaction. What I felt was colder, more mechanical, like code parsing a data stream. I was shifting, from ignored to inevitable. He thought silence meant absence. He'd learned silence could also mean control. I slid my notebook closed and stacked it with the revised contracts I'd quietly annotated with page markers and references to the original ownership clauses. Then I picked up a courier envelope, wrote a name on the front. Robert James, General Counsel, Blackridge Acquisitions. I didn't write a cover letter, just enclosed the printout of the founding patent with one sticky note that said, "For verification purposes, MDH." Let Bryce keep the microphone. I was securing the documentation. By Monday, Bryce was treating himself like a myth in the making. His name started showing up in email threads he wasn't even CC'd on, because he was forwarding his own quotes to entire chains. He'd coined a term, ops-lightenment, to describe his internal cleanup of what he deemed redundant legacy ops, which, if we're being honest, was just him deleting folders with names he didn't recognize. Rebranding is what kept the buyers on the hook, he told a group of directors at the all-hands. Before I showed up, they were lukewarm. Now, they're eager. We gave them a future, not just a dusty trail of compliance slides. No one corrected him. A few even nodded. One clapped. That same week, I watched a new external pitch deck hit the shared drive. The file name was investor.refresh final v2 PDF. Classic Bryce. Inside was a glossy new timeline of company growth milestones, but it read like an alternate history. I scrolled through each quarter, each product launch, each structural breakthrough. My name, gone. So were Ed Parks. So were the first 2 CTOs. The legacy stack was now described as pre-Bryce architecture with no context. I didn't get angry. That would have been a waste of energy. Instead, I opened our internal archive system, navigated to the Founder Annex, locked behind 3 levels of admin access most people forgot existed, located document 14.6b, IP attribution and authorship history per Series A compliance standards. Then I opened Outlook. New message to legalhalcyon.systems. Subject, attribution. Body. Please refer to document 14.6b in the original Founder Annex for IP lineage. MDH, no caps, no attachments, no explanation. I sent it, then watched. A few minutes later, I saw the red receipt from Shannon in legal, then one from Alex, then one from Bryce himself. No reply. Nothing said out loud. Just silence. Perfect. The next day, I noticed someone had tried to unlock the Founder Annex again. Wrong access credentials. 3 failed attempts. Bryce didn't know the back door to the Founder Archive, and now he knew it existed. That's when things got weird. He began circling me. Not obviously, but in little ways. He hovered by my desk a little too long during lunch, asked random questions he didn't care about. Hey, where do we archive old onboarding modules? Or do we still use those Jira backups from 2017? I'd answer with one word, if at all, then go back to my screen. He was probing, looking for cracks, hoping maybe I'd mention what I knew. I didn't, because I no longer cared about their meetings or their buzz. I wasn't trying to prove my value anymore. I was just leaving fingerprints, quietly, permanently. On Wednesday, I printed a single page from the original IP log, the one with the pre-optimization commit records, and left it on the copier tray by accident. I knew Bryce would pick it up. He did. He stared at it for 2 full minutes like it was written in Morse code, then crumpled it, tossed it, walked away. What he didn't know is that I'd already included the same page plus metadata inside the buyer's audit folder 3 days prior. I didn't want my name back on his slides. I wanted it carved where no one could erase it. Let the rebrand roll forward. Let him pitch his half-truths and digital confetti. I wasn't hunting credit anymore. I was building permanence. Bryce walked into the pre-meeting run-through like he was about to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award for Best Startup Swagger. He wore that ridiculous VP pin again, the one he had custom-made like anyone outside of a college frat still gave a damn about lapel flare. The room was packed. Buyer reps, internal leads, the CEO sitting off to the side with his arms crossed like a proud dad watching his kid win a spelling bee with words he couldn't pronounce. I was seated in the back corner. No name placard, no laptop, just my notebook and a mechanical pencil I've used for 11 years. Observer status, remember? Bryce stood in front of the main screen, snapping through slides with one hand while holding a LaCroix in the other like a mic. We've streamlined every legacy dependency, he announced, clicking past a workflow diagram that made absolutely no architectural sense. It was bloated, redundant. Honestly, the old stuff was dragging us down. I watched the buyer's general counsel, the one with the pale blue tie and the habit of jotting notes sideways in his legal pad, pause. He looked up from his paper, eyes flicking to the screen, then over to me. Bryce kept going. Our new stack, lean, scalable, compliant. We even purged dormant credentials and sunset the stuff that didn't align with modern dev standards. Then, like he'd planned it, he made a slow pivot and nodded vaguely toward my side of the room. All that old scaffolding, necessary once, dead weight now. My pencil paused. The room was silent for a beat too long, the kind of silence that's not agreement but hesitation disguised as politeness. Bryce mistook it for awe. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, just lowered my eyes to my notebook and underlined the word scaffolding. The general counsel shifted in his seat. He didn't speak, just leaned back slightly and let Bryce finish his bravado tour, but his gaze returned to me twice before the session ended. Afterward, as people began filing out, someone tapped my chair. I looked up. It was the GC. "Melissa, right?" he asked, glancing at the corner of my badge. "Yes," I said, folding my notebook closed. "I wonder," he said in a voice that suggested he already knew the answer, "if I could borrow a minute of your time, just a hallway thing." I stood slowly. No urgency, no performance, just calm. We stepped out into the side corridor near the storage closet nobody used anymore. He didn't waste time. "You were one of the original architecture contributors?" I didn't lie. I didn't gloat. I just reached into my pocket and handed him a card. Simple white, no logo, no fluff. Just my name, personal number, and one title beneath. Foundational Systems Architect, Independent Advisor, Technical Compliance Board, BTA. He took it, read it once, then looked back up at me and nodded, just once. "Appreciate the context," he said quietly. Then he walked back toward the room without another word. I stood there for a moment, alone in the hallway, staring at the spot where he'd stood. Then I returned to my seat in the back corner. Nobody noticed. Perfect. Bryce started the final investor session like he was headlining a TED Talk, minus the substance. He wore a blazer 2 sizes too tight, probably on purpose, and strutted to the front like the boardroom was his stage. The projector whirred to life. First slide, redefining velocity, the halcyon way. He looked directly at the lead investor and winked. I swear to God he winked. "Gentlemen and ladies," he said, voice oozing faux charm. We've spent the last quarter transforming legacy into leverage. This isn't just a rebrand, it's a reinvention. The CEO gave a small, approving nod. Some junior execs shifted forward in their seats, eager to show engagement. But across the table, the general counsel for the buyers didn't touch his pen, didn't blink, just stared. 5 minutes in, right as Bryce was launching into his favorite buzzword-laced rant about removing legacy inefficiencies, the GC raised one finger. Before we proceed, he said coolly, just one quick check on foundational IP rights. Won't take long. Bryce paused mid-gesture, his fingers frozen over the clicker. Of course, he said, suddenly less loud. The GC reached into his folder, unfolded a simple white card, and held it up. Melissa Hannigan, he read aloud. You're listed here as co-author on the integration patent and a technical advisor to our own audit committee. I didn't move. I didn't nod. I didn't need to. The lead investor leaned forward. Wait, is that who I think it is? Bryce stammered. She's just ops, internal system support. There it was. The freeze, not mine, his. The air in the room changed. The investor looked at Bryce like he'd just watched someone pee in a baptismal font. You told us the stack was proprietary to your new build, he said. You said legacy had been completely purged. Bryce opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Well, we restructured the stack. Most of it. Her role was minor. Technical stuff. The GC interjected. It's her signature on the patent filings, her authorship on the integration layer, her name on the founding infrastructure logs. That doesn't sound minor to me. Silence. I remained completely still. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. Bryce was melting one syllable at a time. He fumbled for his slide remote and hit the back button, retreating to the agenda slide like it was home base. Look, he said, forcing a weak laugh. I think we're getting caught up in semantics. What matters is the future of the product, not some dusty PDFs. The lead investor leaned back in his chair. You erased her. Bryce blinked. She's in the corner, the GC said. And you pitched like she was wallpaper. Bryce's voice cracked slightly. I didn't think that, the investor cut in, is exactly the problem. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was surgical. I stayed still, not because I was frozen, but because I knew something he never understood. Stillness isn't weakness, it's timing, and mine had just arrived. Ms. Hannigan, the lead investor said, breaking the silence like a scalpel through fog. You co-authored the original integration layer, correct? My pencil was still resting in the coil binding of my notebook. I didn't adjust it. I didn't lean forward. I didn't even look at Bryce. I simply turned my head toward the investor, met his eyes, and said, yes. That was it. No marketing fluff, no qualifications. Just the truth, stated plainly, the kind that doesn't need polish. The buyer's CTO, who'd been quiet the entire meeting, straightened in his seat. He tapped the folder in front of him with 2 fingers. We still use her stack today, he said, with a few security updates layered in, but the core architecture, that's hers. Haven't touched the foundational dependencies since 2018, didn't need to. He didn't look at Bryce when he said it. He looked at me. The table shifted. Not physically, but the focus did. Chairs pivoted slightly, eyes moved, postures changed. Suddenly, I wasn't the wallpaper in the corner anymore. I was the structure holding the ceiling up. Bryce let out a short, nervous breath. Well, sure, the old stack is still part of the system, but I optimized. No one asked. The investor cut him off, eyes still on me. We'll come back to you. Bryce's jaw flexed, like he was chewing glass. Someone from our internal legal team pulled out a file and began flipping quickly through documents. I could see the edges of the original signature log peeking out. The CEO cleared his throat. Well, Melissa's always been instrumental in operations support and, Stop, the GC said, not unkindly, but with the full weight of corporate finality. Melissa's contributions are clearly deeper than support. I let that hang there. Not out of pride, out of precision. Vindication doesn't need a parade, it needs clarity. May I ask, the CTO continued, now addressing me directly, why you weren't on the original agenda? Bryce opened his mouth again. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because nobody was looking at him anymore. Not the investors, not the buyers, not even the CEO. They were looking at me. The CTO nodded slowly, understanding the silence for what it was. Then, carefully, he closed his folder. The general counsel added, "We'll need to amend our due diligence notes. Melissa's IP authorship materially affects technical valuation." And just like that, the narrative shifted. Not with fireworks, not with fury, with fact, with names in black ink, with signatures that had waited 12 years to matter. I uncapped my pencil and drew a clean line through the word observer in the margin of my notes. And for the first time in this entire merger circus, I looked up, and the whole table was looking back. They didn't even bother pretending it was a discussion. The lead investor closed his folder with a deliberate snap and rose from his chair. "Let's pause here," he said, with a tone that made it very clear no one in the room was being asked for input. "I want a quick huddle, just our team." The general counsel stood. So did the CTO. They didn't look at Bryce. They didn't invite him. Bryce blinked like he'd just lost control of a video game he didn't know someone else was playing. "Do you want me to?" "We're good." The GC cut in without glancing his way. "Stay here." The three of them stepped into the adjoining conference room, glass doors closing behind them with a whisper that felt louder than a slam. Through the glass, I could see the investor talking, the GC nodding, the CTO pointing toward a printout that looked a lot like the infrastructure flowchart I'd buried in Appendix E 6 years ago. Bryce looked like a deflated balloon left behind after the party, all puff and no air. Nobody told us to stay silent, but the room went quiet anyway. The CEO tried to type something on his tablet, but it was just noise, meaningless clicks against a screen he couldn't control. I reached for my water bottle, unscrewed the lid, took one slow sip. Then I calmly slid my notebook off the table, opened it to the folded page containing the original architecture timeline, and tucked it away in the side pocket of my bag. No rush, no theater, because I knew what came next. 15 minutes later, the investors' team returned. They didn't sit. The lead investor walked to the front of the room, opened the packet that had been distributed an hour ago, and tapped the cover with his pen. "We're issuing a revision," he said. The general counsel handed the updated packet to the intern near the door, who quickly passed out copies like hymnals at a last-minute funeral. I flipped mine open. Top right corner, bolded, just beneath the header, Melissa D. Hannigan, Founding Systems Advisor. I didn't react. The investor continued, "Until all original architectural dependencies and IP authorship are re-verified, we're suspending the transition close. It's imperative that attribution matches the actual technical footprint. Anything less compromises post-acquisition integration." Bryce made a noise, half scoff, half breath, but didn't speak. He didn't have to. He'd already said too much. The CTO added, "Melissa, we'll need your insight on the configuration dependencies next week. Our team is preparing a joint audit log. You good to advise?" "Yes," I said simply. The investor nodded. "We appreciate your clarity." He turned to the room. "Let's take a 30-minute recess. The revised structure will be in effect going forward." Chairs scraped. Papers rustled. People moved, but the air was different now. Denser, like gravity had shifted and no one quite knew where to stand. I sat still for a moment longer, sipping once more, then quietly zipped my bag closed. No gloating, no looks exchanged, no gotcha. Just the quiet return of a name that had never really left, only been buried under Bryce's high-gloss veneer. He sat across the table, pale and blinking, watching as the center of gravity shifted from his slide deck to the footnotes he never thought to read, the same ones I wrote. The closing session started later than expected. Nobody was in a rush anymore. The energy had changed, like the room finally remembered it had a spine. Or maybe just a memory. Bryce was fidgeting, his laptop open, screen untouched. He kept glancing toward the investor table like a waiter trying to make eye contact for a last-minute tip. His suit didn't fit quite as well today. Or maybe it was just the weight of everything he'd tried to bulldoze finally pressing down where confidence used to sit. Melissa Hannigan, Founding Systems Advisor. That title had reappeared not just on the packet, but on the digital M&A portal, on the transition docs, and, most importantly, in the buyer's internal compliance summary. Everything now ran through her. Everything he'd ignored was now in bold. Still, Bryce had one last card to play, or so he thought. He waited for a lull, right after the Buyers' Council wrapped up their final audit notes, right before anyone could officially adjourn. He cleared his throat and stood. "I just want to make something clear," he said, his voice pushing its way across the boardroom like a frat boy auditioning for Shakespeare. "In case there's any confusion about leadership going forward." Here it came. "You know who I am, right?" The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was surgical. I didn't blink, didn't turn to him, just calmly reached into my bag, pulled out the same plain white card I'd handed over days earlier, and slid it across the table to the general counsel with 2 fingers. He took it without a word, read it again, then looked up. The investor leaned over slightly to glance at it too. He smiled, not the warm kind, the kind people use right before delivering a lesson. Then he turned to Bryce, eyes sharp, voice smooth. "Actually, kid," he said, "do you have any idea who she is?" Bryce didn't answer. Couldn't. There was nowhere to pivot, no slide deck to hide behind, no podcast phrase to rescue him. He just stood there, silent, staring at the card like it was written in a language he never learned. The session wrapped without him. I shook the general counsel's hand, nodded once to the CTO, and left the room without turning back. Legacy doesn't need volume. It just needs to be written somewhere you can't erase it. And now it was, permanently.